The war-torn skies above France tremble with the thunder of engines. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 darts between scattered clouds. Its pilot, a young Luftwaffe ace, scans the horizon in panic. His fuel is low, his comrades gone. The radio crackles with static. Then silence. Behind him, a shadow looms. Massive, relentless. The roar of a radial engine fills the air like an approaching storm. Tracer rounds slice through the clouds. Glowing streaks of death. The German pilot jerks his stick, diving toward the tree line below. But the hunter follows. Faster, heavier, unshakable. It's not the elegant Spitfire, nor the sleek Mustang. This beast is different. Its wings are wide, its fuselage thick, its nose armed with 8 heavy machine guns. Every burst from its guns rips the air apart. The German pilot banks desperately. But the next volley tears across his tail. Flames erupt. The once proud ace falls into the fields of Normandy, leaving behind a trail of smoke. Above the wreckage, the victor circles once, its silver skin glinting under the sun. The name stenciled beneath the canopy reads, P-47 Thunderbolt, to understand why German pilots feared it so deeply. Forward we must go back to the beginning. By 1942, the war in the skies over Europe had turned into a brutal chess match, one that the Allies were steadily losing. The Luftwaffe, honed by years of combat experience from Spain to Poland to the heart of France, ruled the air. German Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf FW 190s cut through Allied bomber formations like hawks among pigeons. Every daylight bombing mission carried with it the haunting probability of never returning. The United States Army Air Forces needed an answer, something that could survive the fury of German flak and still face the Luftwaffe head-on. Out of this desperate need, a radical design emerged from the Republic Aviation Corporation, led by the Georgian-born engineer Alexander Kartveli. His vision went against everything fighter pilots believed in. Where the British Spitfire was elegant and light, Kartveli's creation was a monster, twice as heavy, with a wide fuselage and a massive engine dominating its frame. At first glance, it looked more like a flying tank than a nimble dogfighter. Even American pilots joked that it would fall from the sky under its own weight. But beneath that bulky exterior lay innovation. The P-47 Thunderbolt housed the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine, one of the most powerful piston engines of its time. Combined with a revolutionary turbo supercharger system, it could climb to heights few German aircraft could reach and sustain full power in thin air. The design was not about grace, it was about brute force, survivability, and power. In its early test flights, the Thunderbolt impressed engineers but unsettled pilots. It was enormous, complex, and sluggish at low altitudes. Many doubted whether such a machine could ever face the swift German fighters over Europe. Yet, the war offered no luxury of waiting. By the spring of 1943, the first squadrons of P-47C Thunderbolts began operational missions with the 56th Fighter Group in England. Pilots climbed into the cockpit of this steel beast, uncertain of its fate. The Luftwaffe still ruled the skies, but change was coming. The first encounters revealed both flaws and potential. The P-47 struggled in climbs and takeoffs, but proved astonishingly fast in dives. Its heavy frame made it nearly indestructible in a power dive, often outpacing German fighters that dared to follow. Allied pilots began to learn how to fight with it, not against it. And so, what began as a doubted experiment would soon evolve into one of the most feared war machines of the Second World War. By mid-1943, the Thunderbolt was ready for war. Across the English countryside, its growling engines became a daily soundtrack as squadrons prepared to escort American bombers deep into German territory. The skies over occupied Europe had become a graveyard of aircraft. Thousands of Allied bombers destroyed by relentless Luftwaffe interceptors. The P-47 was sent to change that balance. At first, its range was limited. The Thunderbolt could escort bombers only partway across the channel before turning back for lack of fuel. But even that short stretch of protection began to shift morale. Bomber crews felt safer knowing a formation of rugged, thunderous fighters flew above them. In combat, the Thunderbolt proved devastating. At high altitude, its turbo-supercharged engine allowed it to maintain speed and power where German fighters struggled. In a dive, it was unmatched, a streak of silver fury plummeting from the clouds with 850 caliber Browning machine guns blazing. One pilot described its firepower as like flying with a battleship's broadside. Comparisons quickly arose. The British Spitfire remained unmatched in agility. The later P-51 Mustang excelled in range and elegance, but the Thunderbolt's identity was different. It was a survivor. It could take hits that would tear a Mustang apart, yet still limp home riddled with holes. Ground crews often counted hundreds of bullet impacts on planes that still managed to land safely. This resilience came from its sheer size and armored construction. The cockpit was protected by thick plating, and the massive radial engine could absorb punishment that liquid-cooled engines could not. Even direct cannon hits often failed to bring it down. German pilots began to recognize it instantly and dread it. By late 1943, as the Allies intensified their daylight bombing raids, the P-47 became an essential companion. Its presence forced German interceptors to climb higher, burn more fuel, and expose themselves to the deadly precision of Thunderbolt gunfire. Behind every sortie, there was a growing confidence, a sense that the balance of power in the air was beginning to tilt. Pilots who had once cursed the P-47's size now praised its endurance. Commanders started to expand its roles, from escorting bombers to striking ground targets, strafing convoys, and hunting locomotives. The shift had begun. What started as an interceptor was turning into a weapon of air dominance. The Thunderbolt was no longer just a plane, it was the embodiment of Allied power in the European skies, a relentless machine that redefined what air superiority meant. And soon, it would not only challenge the Luftwaffe, it would break it. When the Thunderbolt first appeared in U.S. airfields across England, many American pilots looked at it with skepticism. It was unlike any fighter they had ever seen. Towering over the nimble Spitfires and the sleek P-51 prototypes, the P-47 looked more like a flying fortress than a dogfighter. Pilots joked that it needed its own airfield just to take off. The early months were filled with frustration. Hard landings, sluggish turns, and long takeoff rolls. But as training intensified and pilots learned its rhythm, the Thunderbolt began to earn respect. Its immense power demanded control, precision, and patience. Those who mastered it found themselves commanding a weapon unlike any other. Captain Robert S. Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group was one of them. On one mission, his P-47 was hit by more than 20 rounds from a German FW-190. His cockpit filled with smoke, controls jammed, and canopy stuck. Yet somehow, the Thunderbolt held together, and Johnson returned to base alive. When ground crews inspected the damage, they were stunned. Any other aircraft would have disintegrated. The legend of the P-47's toughness had begun. The transformation among pilots was profound. What started as fear became pride. They called it the Jug, short for Juggernaut. It wasn't elegant, but it was dependable. It could dive faster than anything in the sky, and it could take punishment no man believed possible. Behind this resilience lay unmatched engineering power. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine delivered over 2,000 horsepower. A turbo supercharger, tucked behind the cockpit and connected by long ducts, allowed the aircraft to maintain full engine output at extreme altitudes, a feat German fighters could not match. The P-47's 8 Browning 50 caliber machine guns made it a flying gun platform, unleashing nearly 3,400 rounds per minute. Its construction told a story of survival. Heavy armor plates shielded the pilot, and the thick elliptical wings carried fuel, guns, and ammunition with astonishing stability. Every line of the aircraft was designed for one purpose: endurance under fire. To the Germans, it became a nightmare. Luftwaffe pilots described the P-47 as unzerstörbar, indestructible. Stories spread across airfields of American planes returning home with missing control surfaces, shredded wings, or holes the size of footballs. The FW-190 pilots who once dominated the skies suddenly found themselves outmatched in speed during dives and in survivability when hit. In the words of one captured German ace, "You could hit a Thunderbolt 100 times, and it would still be there, waiting for you." The machine had earned not just the respect, but the fear of those who faced it. The P-47 Thunderbolt was not a dogfighter in the traditional sense. It was too large to twist and turn with a Spitfire, too heavy to pirouette with a Messerschmitt. Instead, its pilots developed new tactics: boom and zoom. From high altitude, the Thunderbolt would dive at tremendous speed toward its enemy, unleashing a storm of .50 caliber fire, then pull away in a steep climb before the German pilot could react. The turbo supercharger made it deadly above 25,000 feet, and in a dive, it reached speeds no Luftwaffe aircraft could safely follow. The Germans learned quickly: never chase a P-47 downward. Many who tried never returned. Its role soon expanded. Once bomber escort duties were split with the longer-range P-51 Mustang, the Thunderbolt found its true calling as a fighter bomber. Low over the fields of France, Belgium, and Germany, the Jug became a terror to anything that moved on the ground. Equipped with bomb racks and rocket launchers, it strafed trains, trucks, and tanks with devastating precision. The 8 machine guns could shred armored columns, and its rugged frame allowed it to absorb heavy flak and still bring the pilot home. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe wasn't the only one dreading the Thunderbolt. German ground forces called them Jabos, short for Jagged Bomber, Fighter Bomber, and feared their thunderous roar. One German tank commander recalled that when Thunderbolts appeared, his men would abandon their vehicles and run for cover. No tank felt safe under the sound of that engine. Behind this tactical dominance was a clear strategic vision. Allied air commanders, men like General Hap Arnold and Jimmy Doolittle, recognized that control of the skies required not just dogfights, but systematic destruction of the enemy's ability to fight. The Thunderbolt became their tool of attrition. It escorted bombers, annihilated ground convoys, destroyed rail lines, and crippled German logistics. By striking deep into enemy territory, it deprived the Wehrmacht of fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements. Every sortie weakened the Luftwaffe's reach and Germany's industrial might. By 1944, the P-47 had evolved from a defensive escort fighter into the backbone of Allied air superiority. It was the hammer that crushed Germany's air and ground defenses alike. And yet, its greatest test was still to come. In the climactic battles that would decide the fate of the skies over Europe. By the summer of 1944, the Allied war machine was in full motion. The invasion of Normandy, Operation Overlord, was underway, and the air above northern France had become a swirling storm of aircraft. Bombers thundered toward inland targets, paratroopers dropped into the night, and over it all, the P-47 Thunderbolts prowled, guardians of the greatest amphibious invasion in history. From dawn to dusk, the skies roared. Thunderbolt squadrons flew hundreds of sorties daily, sweeping over beaches, bridges, and roads. Their mission was clear: crush the German response before it reached the coast. Low over hedgerows and villages, P-47s unleashed their fury. rockets streaking from beneath their wings, and 50 caliber tracers tearing through columns of trucks and tanks. The German defenders, already overwhelmed by naval bombardments and paratrooper assaults, now faced the unrelenting wrath of air power. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, could barely rise to challenge them. But when they did, the skies erupted in chaos. Over the fields of Normandy, FW-190s and Me-109s clashed with Thunderbolts in brutal, twisting duels. For every German kill, several of their own fell in flames. The Thunderbolt's massive frame, so often mocked in 1943, now proved its worth. It could dive out of combat, roll into a climb, and return for another pass, its guns spewing fire with merciless precision. In these skies, heroes were forged. Francis Gabi Gabreski, a Polish-American pilot of the 56th Fighter Group, became one of the top American aces in Europe. His P-47 was a legend, sleek silver with the nose art HVA. He scored 28 aerial victories, many against Germany's finest. Gabreski's bold attacks and surgical precision earned him the title of the Thunderbolt King. Then there was Robert S. Johnson, the man who turned survival into myth. On June 26, 1943, his Thunderbolt was ambushed by 8 FW-190s. Cannon shells tore into his wings and fuselage. One struck his canopy, trapping him inside. Smoke filled the cockpit. Instruments shattered, and his control cables were nearly severed. Yet Johnson refused to bail out. He flew that crippled aircraft 180 miles back to England, the propeller barely turning, and landed safely. Ground crews counted 21 cannon holes and over 200 bullet impacts. Such stories spread like wildfire. Each mission proved that the P-47 was not just a machine. It was a symbol of endurance and dominance. As Allied armies pushed inland from Normandy, Thunderbolts destroyed bridges, convoys, and retreating German divisions. The once invincible Luftwaffe found itself outnumbered, outgunned, and outlasted. The tide of air power had turned, and it would never reverse. The roar over Normandy was more than just victory in the air. It was the sound of the Luftwaffe's empire crumbling. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe, once the pride of Hitler's Reich, was in free fall. Its veteran aces were dead or captured, its fuel reserves depleted, and its new pilots sent into battle with only weeks of training. Above them, the sky belonged to the Americans every day. Waves of P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs swept across Germany, escorting bombers that flattened cities, rail yards, and oil refineries. The Thunderbolts, now seasoned killers, dove through flak storms with fearless precision. In the desperate air battles over the Ruhr Valley and the Ardennes, German pilots discovered a grim truth. Their once superior aircraft could no longer dictate the fight. The FW-190's agility meant little against the P-47's unmatched dive speed and firepower. Even when a Messerschmitt landed a clean hit, the Thunderbolt often refused to die. Its thick armor and radial engine could absorb punishment that would tear a liquid-cooled engine apart. One Luftwaffe report described frustration bordering on disbelief. "Our cannon shells shatter against it. We hit them. They do not fall." The P-47's survivability became its greatest weapon. While German pilots fought with dwindling confidence, American flyers took bolder risks, striking deeper, flying longer, knowing their machines could bring them home. The psychological impact was immense. German ground forces began calling the aircraft Der brüllende Tod, the roaring death. Soldiers would dive for cover at the first sound of its radial engine, knowing the next few seconds could bring rockets, bullets, and fire. By the autumn of 1944, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. The Allied advance through France and Belgium was unstoppable, and every attempt by German aircraft to intervene was met with annihilation. The sky, once the Luftwaffe's domain, now belonged to the Thunderbolt and the Mustang. In the final months of the war, the P-47's dominance reached its peak. Thunderbolts struck German airfields, destroying planes before they could even take off. Others patrolled highways, turning retreating columns into smoldering wrecks. The Luftwaffe's pilots fought with courage, but courage alone could not overcome exhaustion, fuel shortages, and the relentless might of Allied air power. The P-47, massive and unyielding, had become the instrument of that destruction. And when the war finally neared its end, the German pilots who survived knew the truth. It wasn't the fastest plane that won the air war. It was the one that never stopped coming. When the smoke finally began to clear over Europe, the numbers told a story of devastation and triumph. Between 1943 and 1945, P-47 Thunderbolts flew more than 746,000 combat sorties, dropping 132,000 tons of bombs and firing over 135 million rounds of ammunition. Their contribution to the destruction of Nazi Germany's war machine was staggering. In air-to-air combat, Thunderbolt pilots claimed 3,752 enemy aircraft destroyed, with many more crippled or unconfirmed. Yet their true legacy lay on the ground, in the shattered remains of 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 tanks, and 68,000 trucks and vehicles obliterated beneath their guns and bombs. The Luftwaffe, once an unrivaled symbol of Nazi power, was effectively dismantled not only in the air but at its roots, in its fuel depots, factories, and supply lines. For the German war effort, the impact was catastrophic. Fuel shortages became chronic as Thunderbolts and Mustangs tore apart refineries and transport hubs. The once efficient Nazi logistics network crumbled under constant aerial assault. Trains stopped moving. Tanks ran dry. The Wehrmacht, now fighting on multiple collapsing fronts, found itself paralyzed. Morale within German forces sank with each new Allied offensive. Soldiers began to fear the sky itself. Civilians, too, came to dread the daily growl of aircraft engines, knowing that the Jabos, fighter-bombers, meant destruction was near. One German infantryman later recalled, "You never forgot that sound, the deep roar, the whistle of the dive, then the earth shaking as they struck." There was nowhere to hide. Allied reports confirmed what their pilots already knew. The Thunderbolt had become a decisive instrument of total war. It wasn't just about air-to-air supremacy. It was the relentless erosion of the enemy's will and capacity to fight. General Karl Spaatz, commander of the U.S. Strategic Air Forces in Europe, called the P-47 the hammer of the 9th Air Force. Its ability to strike anywhere, any time, in any weather, had transformed the nature of the European battlefield. The Luftwaffe's power had not merely been challenged, it had been broken. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, the Thunderbolt stood as one of the great weapons of Allied victory. While the P-51 Mustang often took the spotlight for its long-range escort role, historians and pilots alike recognized that the P-47 had carried the heaviest burden, the daily, grinding destruction that made victory possible. In the ruins of Europe, thousands of burnt-out German vehicles and wrecked locomotives bore silent testimony to the Jug's destructive power. Allied ground forces often remarked that advancing troops could follow the trail of devastation left behind by Thunderbolt squadrons, smoking tanks, bombed bridges, and broken columns stretching for miles. By war's end, more than 15,600 P-47s had been produced, more than any other U.S. fighter. Its ruggedness and reliability became the gold standard for combat design. Pilots who flew it described it not merely as a machine, but as a partner that refused to let them die. After 1945, as jet technology began to transform aviation, the Thunderbolt's time as a frontline fighter came to an end. Yet its influence persisted. Engineers studying post-war jet designs, such as the F-86 Sabre and A-10 Thunderbolt, carried forward the lessons learned from Kartvel's masterpiece: rugged survivability, heavy firepower, and the importance of a pilot's protection. The A-10, in fact, would later be affectionately nicknamed the Warthog and officially christened the Thunderbolt II in honor of its WWII ancestor. Like the original Jug, it was designed to fly low, strike hard, and come home alive. Historians reflect that the P-47 symbolized the industrial might of the United States, an aircraft built not for beauty, but for endurance, reliability, and overwhelming force. It was a machine that mirrored the soldiers who fought beneath it, stubborn, unyielding, and unstoppable, even in modern air warfare. The philosophy behind the Thunderbolt endures: the belief that strength, resilience, and firepower can win wars as much as speed and finesse. When the last Thunderbolts were finally retired from service, many had logged thousands of flight hours, surviving damage that would have destroyed lesser planes. They had lived through the most brutal air war in history and emerged as legends. For the men who flew them, the memories never faded. The deafening roar of the engine, the recoil of 8 guns blazing, the sight of the horizon turning gold as they returned home once more. The war had ended, but the Thunderbolt's legacy had only just begun. In the quiet that followed the guns, the P-47 Thunderbolt stood not just as a machine of war, but as a monument to endurance, a testament to what courage and engineering could achieve when bound by necessity. When it first entered the skies, few believed in it. It was too big, too heavy, too slow, a brute among dancers. Yet, as the war deepened, it became precisely what the Allies needed: a weapon of persistence. It didn't need elegance to win, it needed heart, and it had that in abundance. For the pilots who strapped themselves into its armored cockpit, every mission was a test of will as much as skill. They fought not only the enemy, but the elements, the flak, the cold, and the ever-present chance that this flight might be their last. Through that struggle, a bond was forged between man and machine that transcended design. The Thunderbolt was no longer just metal and rivets. It was defiance made tangible. In the post-war years, historians and veterans alike would look back on it as the embodiment of the Allied spirit: powerful, resilient, imperfect, but unbreakable. It symbolized how ingenuity could turn skepticism into supremacy, and how human determination could transform even the most unlikely creation into a legend. For the German pilot who heard the growl of the Thunderbolt, the war in the sky was already lost.